Senator Fasano.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, first and foremost, Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate have worked extraordinarily hard on reaching, one, a budget resolution bipartisanly, and number two, have pushed staff of LCO, OFA, and OLR to the limits. I will tell you, I think in my years in this building, I never saw a staff work any harder than I have seen the staff work over the last week. They have been here at all of our, both sides of the aisle, both chambers, whenever we asked. A small change by us is a huge change in their world. They don't gripe, they don't complain, they just do it. And on behalf of this chamber, I know we all thank them for their extraordinary work and dedication to our business. And they're the people behind the scenes that when we come out and use numbers, they generate the numbers. And they're the ones we call upon to make our language look clean and sharp and make us look good. And I just know that everybody in this chamber thanks them for their strong and dedicated work to our chamber. And I just wanted to make sure that I did not miss saying those remarks to our bipartisan, nonpartisan staff. Madam President, this state, I honestly believe, has one chance for a change, one and only chance. This is it. This is it. We have seen a downturn in our economy like we have never seen before. It is consistent, it is telling, and it is sad. And we have a choice. Either we're going to continue to ignore those indicators out there, and this isn't doom and gloom, this is just facts. And if you turn your head to the facts, you end up where you are. We have to change who we are as a state. We have to change our philosophy. Look, when the first budgets went out, we raised the taxes. I get it. It was after an old administration. There was a view, whether I agreed with it or not. We all went for the ride. It just didn't pan out. You doubled down on it, it didn't pan out. Sooner or later, you got to say, maybe that's not the way. Sooner or later, you've got to stop and say, we have to think differently in this building. We got to think differently in this circle. Forget about who's right or wrong. That's an irrelevancy. What's relevant is a choice. Are you going to continue down the path, or are you going to say, let's just see what happens if we change. Let's just see if we make a shift in a different direction. We've gone one way, and we've seen the results. What if, hypothetically, we go the other way? What's wrong with that? What is wrong with that? But to say that we're going to tax cell phones, every parent now gives their kid a cell phone. Why? You want to know where your child is. If your child doesn't get on a bus, if your child's at sports and needs a ride home, if there's an emergency, that's why they have it, and we're going to tax it? Everybody who's got one of these, which is everybody has one of these, and we're going to tax them? We're going to say for 49 cents every month, 50 cents, whatever that number is, we are going to tax them? For businesses, I know my business, I think I get 25 or something like that that I give to my staff so that they're able to communicate with the office. This phone, smartphone, we all know as we sit around this circle, is the lifeblood of our existence. We email, we text, we communicate, we move business, we talk to constituents, we move documents. It is a function of business. You're taxing a property of business. I got to tell you, Someone had to search long and hard to come up with the tax on a phone as a methodology to raise revenue. Madam President, we talked about tolls. I will try not to go into my toll dissertation. But when you get an MTA type of structure, where you're going to say, we're going to give to a quasi-agency the absolute right to tax, the absolute right to assess fees, the absolute right to raise revenue, the absolute right to come up with a transportation plan, the absolute right to control those funds, with no legislative oversight, what possibly could go wrong there? What possibly could go wrong there? Have we just forgotten about the Lottery Commission? Or the person who retired out of the housing department for $250,000? Have we forgotten about that? That money that could have gone to housing? The Lottery Commission was an absolute fiasco. Had we found out about it? We found out about it because we set up a quasi, and what we do in this state, rightfully or wrong, Republicans and Democrats are to blame. We say, there you go, we trust you with all good intent. With all good intent, we think people have the same frame of mind we will, that they're going to do their job and not abuse their power. What we saw in a lottery was an absolute abuse of power, but for a whistleblower who had the courage to stand up and say, it doesn't affect me, but you guys know what the heck is happening in the Lottery Commission? Do you see the salaries we're giving to the Lottery Commission? Do you see the abuse in the Lottery Commission? And we did a bipartisan investigation. And I got to tell you, it was truly bipartisan. And those who were involved, I think, came out and you had resignations, too, and a change. But I guess we're going down the same path, but on steroids. We're going to give this committee to raise all this money. Oh, by the way, they had to stick in the bill tolls. Had to. It had to be to push my button. That's the only reason I could think. There was no evidence that tolls raise revenue. The DOT commissioner will tell you that. We can't put tolls at our borders because we made a deal in '84. And if we put tolls at our borders, we must pay every dollar back since 1984. We could put congestion tolls. The paper that was done, 2 white papers they're called, that were done in 2015, the time the governor set up his transportation committee, neither one of them proofed out that tolls work. Neither one of them. It wasn't done for that, and the commissioner would tell you, I didn't do it to prove that tolls were working. I wanted to see if we can put these tolls for congestion. He actually has a pretty good plan to take the traffic out of Fairfield. I think Commissioner Redeker is a very smart man. But he never stood up and say tolls are a revenue driver. This governor's never stood up and say the tolls are a revenue driver. Because he knows. The governor of Malloy knows. He's not looking at that revenue. But we lose that control. You're going to tell me a quasi-agency that's backed by our faith and credit that we're going to put a line item in who's going to be able to collect money, pay salaries, is not going to say, well, let's put up tolls and see what happens. We reap the benefits. And we all in this circle can think of a number of quasi-agencies that we've seen around this state that have run amok and probably are still running amok. We just haven't caught up to them yet. And we don't have all that much time to do it. We're part-time legislature, we're catching up with this, we're catching up with that. It is very difficult to get ahead of the game. Madam President, tax on fantasy sports. Madam President, George Jepson came out with an opinion that was a request of Senator Looney and Senator Duff. I think it was a year or two ago. Please forgive me, I don't recall the exact date. I know it was April, but I remember it was 2016, I believe, where the question was posed because someone wanted to tax fantasy sports, and George Jepson said, you cannot, it will open up a compact. You'll be subject to litigation by the tribes and others. As I stand here today, I know of no other fact that would change the relevance of that opinion letter. Now, that matter, I wrote to the AG and asked him, do you care to make a change? In that letter he wrote back to me, asked him by 6 o'clock. I think he was a little upset that I asked by 6 o'clock, but he said, I basically know of no facts that would change that opinion. So that's a question. That's a question. Madam President, there's an increase on cigarette and tobacco, same pot that we go to all the time. There's a tax on non-prescription drugs. How much more regressive tax can you have than non-prescription drugs? It hurts all levels. I would argue more to those who are elderly and maybe low income, who want to go to the store to get the medicine they need, are going to get taxed. Another tax. Is that really good policy to tax non-prescription drugs? Does that really make a lot of sense? Is that what we're going to stand for in the state of Connecticut? Is that what we're going to do? Madam President, it also shifts the pension on parts of the pension, normal costs, onto the backs of municipalities. Onto the backs of municipalities. I don't think there is a senator in this circle who has not heard from their mayor, first selectman, town manager, town council, that enough is enough with the property taxes. Enough is enough with the property taxes. These normal costs are going to go on the back of municipalities and are going to raise property taxes. That's number one. Number two, anybody in this circle who does not believe that once you puncture that, or get through that door, I should say, of putting normal costs on the back of municipalities, have got to know the next time we have a deficit, it's going to be, well, it's normal costs, and we're only going to add 1% of the arrearage costs. And then 3 years after that, we're only going to add 4% of the arrearage costs. That is going to be a cash cow for many legislators to come. We need to stop it. We need to say, no, there's another way. Madam President, the reason why I bring these issues out is to talk about why the approach by the Republicans are different. The House and Senate Republicans have thought of something that says we need to look at life differently. And the way we need to look at life is to say to people, we're not going to raise taxes. We're not going to do that. We say we are going to understand that people are moving out of this state and we need them to stay in this state. We are going to say we respect the elderly. We are going to say we recognize the elderly. So what do we do? What do we do? Like, I believe the Democratic proposal, we both agree we shouldn't tax Social Security. Common ground. But we go a little further. We don't want to tax pensions for a single filer under $74,000 because we believe that you could go to other states and not be taxed on that money. We want you to stay here. We want you to stay here. And oh, by the way, even if you own a vacation home, we want you to stay in Connecticut. We want you to think of Connecticut and love Connecticut. We don't want to force you out. We don't tax pensions, joint filers, under $100,000. Why? Because we want them to stay here too. Why do you think Florida does it? Why do you, if we don't attract young kids and we don't attract people to the state, we lose that base. Perfect example, when Governor Scott came up, or Governor Scott said, the reason why I want to get businesses and young kids to work in Florida, because grandparents moved to that state to be with their grandkids. Pretty simple idea. Madam President, we've talked for infinitum about educational funding. And as Senator Whitko said, there are a couple of cases out there about education. And we come up with a formula that is real. We come up with a formula that takes into account poverty, takes into account value of the real estate, takes into account English learners. We take that into account. We do a true formula, a formula that makes sense. It's been out there for, I was going to say 6 weeks because I'm losing track of time. It's been out there since April. And we know in this building, if someone hates something, they go after it. They may disagree with the formula, but I haven't seen anybody come up and say, this is really bad. This is a real formula. Every town's going to be able to sit and say, this is how much I'm getting. If I don't have a class of X, I'm not getting that. If I do have a class, this is what I'm getting. Brings certainty. We also recognize that there's a shift in population, right? There's some towns that are losing kids and some towns that are gaining kids, and nobody likes to take money away from kids or education. We recognize that shift, and we put in a plan over 10 years so that towns could plan for that shift in education, and we put education where it's supposed to be. It's a new way of thinking. Prioritize progress. It goes back. You don't need tolls. We got a plan that says if you want to do transportation, make a commitment, put it in general obligation funds and say you're going to do it. $65 or $68 billion in 30 years. That's a lot of money. It's not $100 billion, as someone pointed out, but we don't have a $100 billion plan out there. Nobody does at this point. $68 billion is a lot of money. You could only do one project between New Haven and New London and New Haven and Greenwich. That's it. You try two, you shut down that portion of the state. Using Hartford as a middle point, you could only do one project between Hartford and Mass and Hartford and New Haven, or you shut down this state. It's the way life is. The Q Bridge was 27 years. 27 years. How many, it was like a 1.2 billion, I believe it was 1.2 billion. It was 2.1 billion, but the point is it took 27 years, a lot of money. You couldn't do two of those projects. It would take too long. Madam President, prioritize progress says we need to do this. Madam President, we lower taxes for retirees. We fund Meals on Wheels. We make sure that the elderly can keep their personal needs allowances. We add to the dial ride. We make sure that we have Connecticut home care so the elderly can age at home. Something they want to do. And if you have an elderly parent, that's something that you want. It's more expensive to put them in a home than it is to have them at home. And if you can swing it, this allows that to happen. That is good policy. That is good policy. Madam President, we reduce the size of government. We have structural changes like bonding on issuance and allocations, and a spending cap. Madam President, before I conclude, officially, I see on the clerk's desk that you cannot miss. LCO, I believe it is 10072. I'd like to officially call the amendment and request permission to summarize and move the amendment.
Mr. Clerk.
Senate Amendment Schedule B, LCO number 10072. It's offered by Senators Fasano, Whitcoe, et al.
Senator Fasano.
Madam President, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Madam President, with the amendment now officially out on the floor.
You moved the amendment, sir?
I did, but I will again.
Please.
I moved the amendment, request permission to summarize. I've already summarized the amendment, so I don't have to go back through it. I think Senator Formica has also, and Senator France and Senator Whitcoe have all talked about this amendment. Here's the bottom line. We all love this state. All of us love this state. The question is, what are we going to do to save it? Are we going to go forward with a different plan, with a different methodology, or are we going to go forward with the same recipe that we've had for a number of years, going way back? Not going to say just this administration, because that would be inaccurate. Going way back. Are we going to change? Are we going to change? The budget that we'll talk about perhaps later has a lot of earmarks. We got to stop it. We have to get control of what we're doing. We have to stop it. If not us, who? If not us, who? Now's the time to act. Now's the time to act. I fear that in January and February, the numbers that we're going to get are going to be very scary. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Anybody in business around this circle, actively in business, feet on the ground, will tell you what is going on. Madam President, I would ask for a roll call vote when the matter is called. Thank you, Madam President.
Roll call vote will be had.